Hi, my name is Truls. It's good to be here. I'm presenting today, which is kind of obvious with the microphone and the clicker and everything, I guess. But um, we'll get back to me a bit later. It's not that important right now, but today's topic is security monitoring and how we can learn about it through failure. Since I am the medium which this presentation is being communicated via, if we do some simple math, the failure is me, which is, I think, a fair statement. Can I swear? Is that allowed? Yes, okay, cool. I've fucked up more than I made correct decisions, I think. Sometimes I don't even learn from the mistakes I make. But I think that's a good thing, actually. So security monitoring, we can't talk about it without talking about also some related stuff like security operations. So we will go through quite a lot of different topics today. When I planned this session sometime last year, because I like to be prepared, I had the idea to use some examples we have learned from Ukraine to sort of state why security monitoring is so important. Now, of course, since I made this presentation, there has been some transatlantic developments, it's unfair to say developments in the Middle East, but I don't want to get too political, but the world is changing. I'm not selling you anything, so I feel like I can stand here and say that, things are happening, it's going to affect us. You don't need to buy anything, you're fine. And can I just say, as sort of like a little rant, the phrase once in a lifetime event, as a soon-to-be 34-year-old millennial, is not working as advertised for me. There's been more than I can count on my fingers in my lifetime, which is, not that good. But anyway, the lessons we can take from Ukraine. This was presented by the Department of Defense from Ukraine at an AVS summit in Sweden. Basically, they started to move some workloads into the cloud before the invasion, but when the invasion happened, a lot of their on-premises data centers were taken out in the first hours of the war. And so they had a simple option: keep the service running by migrating it to the cloud, which was at that time not allowed under their constitution because it was Department of Defense stuff, or not have the service. Well, the choice was simple: you migrate it to the cloud. Similarly, during Sikkerhetsfestivalen 2024 as well, there was a Norwegian researcher that did some studies into how we report security, which found that there was around 10 to 20%, depending on which country you're in, difference between the reported security and the actual operational security, which of course was that the operational security was always worse than what the CISO and the dashboards reported. What they did in Ukraine, this researcher found, was that they just had to make it secure. You couldn't have a policy that say you're not supposed to do this. You were unable to do what you were not supposed to do. They managed to get, and of course there's a lot of different environments, a lot of different places, a lot of different organizations in Ukraine, but the organizations he studied managed to get ISO certifications and all that stuff by doing the operational stuff first, actually being resilient and defending themselves. And not focusing too much on, the other way around. So I think that's two lessons we can learn there: is to be pragmatic, and operational security, actual detection and actual protection and actual remediation is going to be more important, I think, in the coming years. Now, if you're thinking, this guy is an idiot, I don't agree at all, that's also fair. I'm open to being wrong. I have somewhere around 40 to 60 minutes. I'm not going to be able to explore every single avenue out there. So there will be a QR code at some point later where you can tell me how wrong I am, or you can ask questions or influence what we talk about. But yeah. The other part of this talk is, of course, the failure part. It's part social commentary and part because it's more fun to learn through failure. The social commentary comes from one of my fellow Microsoft MVPs here in Norway called Marius Sandbu. He said that humility is gone. Everyone on LinkedIn, on Twitter, every presenter is so sure these days. I like to believe I'm a bit of a counterlever to that because I'm never sure of anything, to be honest, but here I am. There's two types of presenters, those who are sure and those who don't know when to shut up, and I'm the last I'm the last kind of presenter. But I think we should invite failure. We should talk about it. We should celebrate people who can admit to being wrong, and also companies that allow you, you know, the ability to fail. And I think it's more easy to learn from. If you say, I wanted to do this, I fucked it up, here's how I fucked it up, and this is how I fixed it, is way more easy to understand the context around it than saying, here's what I wanted to do, it went perfect, I'm great. Doesn't do it for me. So, this is your chance to influence stuff. The URL is, I didn't pay for Slido, I did the free version, so the URL is a bit long. I promise the QR code goes to where it says it's supposed to go. If not, feel free to come up and slap me. That's fine. But if you want to ask questions, because I figured this out, that after presenting for 3-4 years now at Norwegian conferences, you present to 80 people, there's one question. You go to Denmark, present for 10 guys, there's 20 questions, right? So there's a bit of a difference. This usually works. The code will come up at later points as well. So, the only thing I ask is, be nice. I watch a lot of stand-up, so I believe I could, do like a comeback singer if you do something mean, but I would probably break down and start crying on stage. So, be nice. I was almost wearing the same shirt when I got here. I own more than one shirt, I promise. I own 2 shirts. But this is me. I'm a security architect right now at a company called Secra. We do security stuff. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I have 2 cats. This is relevant because last 2 conferences, I somehow cat people find a way to mention that they have cats all the time, and then people dock me points. They give me like a yellow note, and they're like, "You didn't show me a picture of a cat." So this time I got ahead of it. There will be cat pictures. Oh, yes. And I have a website. I write some stuff, not mandatory to check out. I have a GitHub. If it looks like AI slop, it's just me being bad at writing code. So that's also fine. Not mandatory to check out, but if you want to see, does this guy know what he's talking about? The clue is somewhere between yes and no. But yeah, that's all you need to know. If you want to do it, if you want to know more, you can do some social engineering. These are the cats. This is Mango and Chili. They will be very sad if you leave red or yellow notes, by the way. I'm just kidding. They don't even know their own names, basically, so they don't care. Do what you want. The structure of the presentation today will be quite simple, as I am a simple guy. We will do some foundational work. We will then build upon that with specific examples that, either it requires you to have some prerequisite knowledge or listen to the foundational talk. You can choose whichever you want. And then, based on if you have any questions, you can raise a hand whenever you want. Or if I feel like it, we will sometimes dive a bit into some details if it's interesting. For the foundational works and a little book joke, and I guess it's a TV series now as well, we will go through very quickly a glossary. I'm going to assume that most of you know most of the words I'm going to use, but there is this thing called curse of knowledge. I cannot say I've been cursed with a great amount of knowledge, but a little bit in a very specific field in security. And so a lot of the words and phrases I use, I assume everybody knows them, but that's not the case. So we will go through some words. We will cover security operations, security monitoring, how it fits together, the mistakes we make, and then I will present something called antipatterns, which is basically a fancy way of saying stuff you're not supposed to do that you keep doing. And yeah, that's the foundation stuff. So for the glossary, we'll go through some simple words. Everybody probably knows Security Operations Center, but I will say SOC. This can be a location or a unit in your company. Most of you probably have an outsourced SOC that you hire in. Does not mean that you can just close your eyes and say la 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 when security stuff happens. Security operations, This can be a team, SecOps. It depends on your size organization. It can be internal IT, it can be SecOps, it can be the SOC team. But this is, for the purpose of this talk, security operations is a collection of tasks and disciplines. Security monitoring then being one single discipline under that umbrella. And this is about, security monitoring is about live threat detection in my sort of like very generalistic definition. I will talk about endpoint detection response. I called it modern endpoint protection, so I will say EDR. Then you have another EDR, but it's just abbreviated to XDR, which I will also talk about. What is inside an XDR, because this is a collection of different security tools in a single pane of glass, this is not standardized. So if you buy an XDR, it is quite random what you get. It depends on the vendor you're buying from. And then we have AV, which, antivirus, but this is, basically signature-based detection on your endpoints. Then for the, the fun and not complicated at all abbreviations, security information and event management, SIM, which people in the security industry have been, they say the SIM is dead for 10 years now, still around. But this is where we do centralized logging. This is where we take in structured data and we do live threat detection. People are saying that data lakes have come to take over the SIM's job, but a data lake in my eyes is basically just offloading a bunch of the more heavy data operations where you can push both structured and unstructured data. So usually you will have both these things working together, where you will send, we'll talk more about that later, I'm not going to go on a tangent about that now. And here, I basically realized before the talk that I've basically just, this is just wrong, but incident automation, like infrastructure as code for your security alerts and incidents, but infrastructure as code is, desired state, and then SOAR is not desired state, so it's just a bit wrong. But it's how we orchestrate our incidents, right? So when an incident happens, do we isolate, enrich, send a ticket? That's SOAR. So how does this all fit together? Now, in my world, I come from enterprise MSSP. You have the SOC, they do security operations, security monitoring is one of those. Now you could say, in your day-to-day security monitoring, there's a lot of things that happens that's related. You have incident response, threat intelligence, malware analysis, all these things. And if you look at security monitoring, you get incidents that your security analysts will handle. They do incident response. Yes, that is true. But incident response is also its own thing, where you have people who are specialized in, securing evidence, backup, restoration. And so in Norway and the Nordics, not all of these different disciplines is a single person. You have a security analyst, they work security monitoring, maybe they are specialized in malware analysis. And then you build a security or an incident response team. So when I'm talking about security monitoring, I'm also talking about all these other things playing into it, in a sense. It goes very hand in glove. So for a very sort of like brief introduction to security monitoring, how it works. Basically, you're on your computer, on your phone, you go to browse, Norwegian Rikskringkasting. I can't translate it very quickly in my head. I have a limited vocabulary to work with there. Or you open an email. This generates logs or events or data, all the same thing. But this basically tells the story of what happened on that single computer. That's simple. And so if we imagine that we have this at scale, where we have multiple computers and servers and applications and SaaS and networks and all that stuff, all of the digital estate of a single company, that tells the entire story of that company. Now, it's very romanticized, the full picture of the company, a library of stories. Full picture is in exclamation points. No, wait. Is that no? Exclamation point is something different. Strike that. I'll not do a translation. I'll put it like this because you'll never get the full picture. That is sort of like a utopian dream because of budget constraints, or some applications, they don't export proper logs. Since this is a developer conference, application logs are horrible. We can talk more about that later. Also, I used very specifically this picture because it's stone tablets that are not complete, because that's the picture you'll be working with. Sometimes logs are missing, they've expired, whatever. And so the reason we do this, why we gather all these logs like squirrels hiding nuts for Christmas, or winter, I guess. Squirrels have no concept of Christmas. But a threat actor can go on your computer and destroy the evidence, right? They can wipe the logs, remove it, or anything else, basically. So we can ship the logs centrally to, store them. That's a good thing. Now, we can also have a server malfunction, or if it's a firewall, they will rotate the logs very quickly because they have limited storage space, so you lose the data. So that's also a reason to store it. And if I was at the previous talk, they talked about data sets and graphs, which is way next level. But even just doing incident response, and if you're looking at single computers and single firewalls and trying to get this data together, you will almost always pull the data into one place and then do the searches from there. You won't sit and search on a single computer. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to pull data and store it in a single location. So how does it work? To put it very, very simply, we define all of the different things we have that generate data as a source, and then where we want to send the data as a sink. Then there is just a method of sending the data from the source to the sink, which largely depends on what kind of source it is. So, it can be an agent, like an EDR agent, which sends logs. It can be an API. It can be an ingestion API. Whatever method you use there, we move the data from the source to the sink. And then, of course, the sink can be a SIM, the source can be, or the sink can be a data lake, or in some cases right now, the big providers like SentinelOne and Microsoft and Palo Alto, they all have most of these capabilities in one platform. Of course, most of them are under different licenses, so you have to pay more to use all the things, but that's how security works. We'll get a bit more back to criticizing vendors later in the talk. So how does this work under an attack? So let's imagine we go to open an email, and wouldn't you know it, it's the earnings report, shareholder value, great stuff. So of course, since you are very interested in shareholder value, you download the earnings report because, that's important. But you don't know the fact that it contains malware. Who could do such a inconceivably evil thing as, confusing shareholder value with malware? But when you go to open it, this then runs malware in the background. Let's say it uploads itself to SharePoint, and other computers also download the file. Now here, we have a bunch of logs that will be generated on your computer. When you open something, you download something, you run something, it generates logs. Then we have logs in Microsoft 365, right? You upload to SharePoint, or you get an email. Other computers generate logs, you have Outlook logs, all that stuff. This is great. So if we know about this incident at this point in time, it's quite clear. But then reality hits, and in the Microsoft world, you only get 30 days of logs included in the price. So on day 31, we're left with this. What does that tell me? It tells me who got the file. Probably can't get the file and analyze it to see what the malware did. And I know who uploaded it, so I know where it ran. But if you ask me, what does it mean? I don't know. I can make a qualification or qualified guesstimation about what it means, but I don't know in detail what happened. And so this is why things like looking at how long you store your logs, even storing it in a cold storage for a longer time for very key logs is very important. At this point, if there are any questions, or if you're fed up with me already, there it is again. You can go in and harass me. No one has harassed me yet. That's a new record. I'm lying. Never tried this before, actually. So let's talk about some mistakes. That's why you're here. Now, the original sin of cloud logging in general, and I got a call from a Microsoft representative, and he said, "We need to celebrate. one of your customers, they just invested big time in logs. And I was like, no, no, they didn't. They made a mistake, surely. I think it was around like 300,000 Norwegian kroner in like a week or something in Kubernetes logs. Now, if you were to come to me a couple of years back and said, "Oh, we deployed the Kubernetes cluster, security, please," I would tell you, "What's a Kubernetes cluster? I don't know, no idea. What is a container?" As I said, I'm not a very smart man, but what I just told you there is a very common scenario. People from all walks of IT come, they have something new that they've bought or deployed, and they say, "Here, Security Operations Center, security, please." And I have no context. My mind is screaming at me to say, "What the fuck?" But what do you want from me, right? So we'll get back to how we can work that out later. Cloud logging is expensive. In fact, it is very expensive. One example I have is I was working one place where there was a international service provider. I won't name any names, but basically what they had done is they had logged all the things, because it's best practice. You want all the logs, right? All the logs for forever. Now what they had done is that they had taken all of these logs and had sent them into the most expensive tier of logs, right? So it costs a metric ton of money. And then when we looked at the actual coverage that they used the logs for, 10%. I think somewhere around 30 to 40% of the logs were duplicate, so they were ingesting the same logs from the same sources using different methods. It was clear that they had no idea what they were doing. And they had also gone and deployed all of the templates from like types of analytic rules, detection queries, and they had over 1,000 incidents, medium and high, every single day. So it is quite easy today to use these tools. It is quite easy to set up. As they say in the world of drugs, the first hit is always free. These tools are really simple, but that does not mean that the subject matter beneath them and the workings of it isn't complex, right? So that's something we need to keep in mind. Is all this logging then wasted? Most of it was. I think we saved them somewhere around $100,000. I think it was monthly. It might be yearly. We'll say monthly. It has greater effect. So we have this concept that I need everybody to know about, which is called primary and secondary data. I learned it from Microsoft. They probably didn't invent it, but I could probably made a better triangle myself. I stole this from a Microsoft blog. It is quite unsettling to look at, actually. But primary data, this is what we use for live threat detection, right? So threat hunting, or when we want something that needs what you call it, like full support. So we need to be able to query the data quickly with low latency. We need to be able to use a bunch of advanced search functions. Secondary security data, this can live in the data lake, or another form of cold storage, where the latency is a lot higher. It's harder to query the data, and maybe you use the logs for on-demand compliance, instant response, whatever. There are methods that allow you to take something like firewall logs, which is quite low value for detection, right? So it's a lot of volume, and the amount of data you actually use is quite low compared to what you pay for it. So you can send this data to the secondary security data, and then take parts of it and move it to the primary data, and then query it there. There are mechanisms for this, but it takes some investment in terms of people and setting up processes, and most people don't do this today, which is quite sad, because you can save a lot of money, and it's good practice, because the data you send here, you can store it for longer. When you're talking instant response, networking logs becomes a hell of a lot more valuable. But yeah, I tried my hand at some. I'm not sure which generation is the young generation these days, if it's Gen Z or whatever, but another common L, which I guess is a loss, is If we look at security monitoring, like I explained earlier, you have a source, you have an ingestion mechanism, you parse the data, you query the data, and you create an incident. That's how security monitoring works. Now, for these queries, a lot of the times we use templates. Now, there are two ways to fuck up templates. One of the ways is that you just deploy them as they are, because they are a starting point, they're not supposed to be the end state. If you deploy 200 templates that comes built in with any solution, congratulations, you have deployed alert fatigue. The way this works is that if you have two companies, they have the same tech stack, but one company, let's say they use VPN a lot, it's company mandated, and the other company does not allow VPN usage at all. Well, if you deploy the same detection query, they will give you two completely different results. And the fact is that many companies do this. They think that I have 200 rules deployed, must mean I am very well protected. No. 10 specialized rules for your company that you have taken great care in crafting, I think will be way more valuable than 200 really shit rules. So that's one side of it. You can get a lot of false positives. The other side of it, and pardon me because this is going to be a lot more in-depth than the rest of the presentation so far, but this is Microsoft Defender XDR. You don't need to know what's happening on the screen, actually. This is custom query language. What I've done here is I've created a demo where I did for Nick, where I had 4 storage accounts. One of them was vulnerable, and I ran an enumeration script. This query comes from Microsoft, and it basically compares the amount of unique requests to the storage account with the amount of total requests. And if that number is the same, most likely they are scanning it. Now, if you see the results here, storage account number 3, which is the vulnerable one, does not show up. So why? Well, it's because some idiot, which in this case, again, it's always me, I was using the storage account at the same time. So the original query then is crafted in a hermetically sealed test environment. Of course, it works when no one is using it, but can we assume that no one is using our resources? No. So in this case, what the demo shows is basically that you have one side where you have a template that gives you a lot of false positives, and one side you have a template that gives you no results ever, basically, since the storage accounts will be in use. So this is why the field of detection engineering is so important when it comes to security monitoring. And it's one of the most common mistakes we see in security monitoring is that new SOCs, and especially like internal SecOps teams without the external SOCs, they deploy templates and they stop. And that's not the value of having all this data that you pay for at all. So, if there are any more questions, here's the QR code again. I'm going to check if anyone has harassed me so far. No harassment. Great. We're doing great. It's perfect. As I said, if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to yell something mean out, the last part you can drop, actually. If you didn't know this, I'm a guy who just thinks about things and then I say them out loud, and it's not always the greatest idea, but it is how it is. It is what it is. All right. Antipatterns. Anybody heard of antipatterns? Okay, that's good. So I guess developers use them more than security people, which I'm desperately trying to change this, but best practice, we don't always agree, but the definition is pretty hard to argue with. Anti-patterns fall somewhere on the other side of the coin, right? It's a common response to a recurring problem that's usually ineffective. An example I can give you, which is personally, this is being recorded, by the way, I'm not sure why I'm saying this, but I've always done it this way. It was safe when I learned it. So an example of this is, from me personally, I learned how to properly brush my teeth at the age of 25. I had just had bracers for the second time because the people who invented chaos theory also invented my teeth. So they're pointing in every direction. But after I got the bracers off, I kept having plaque buildup on the back of my teeth because I must have missed the lesson from my parents. You're supposed to brush the back of your teeth. I also learned at another conference, never simulate toothbrushing on stage, which can have, bad consequences. But I was actually just brushing the front and the bottom and the tops of my teeth. I was just doing 2/3, which is, not good. It's the same as, patching only 2/3 of your environment because you didn't know you were supposed to patch the third. But yeah. If anyone is playing buzzword bingo today, congratulations, Zero Trust. These are my paint drawings. I will take no criticism. But the idea is that Zero Trust illustrates antipatterns very well, because this is how we used to design systems. When I started out, this was, encapsulated. A bunch of, everything inside is safe, everything outside is unsafe. Perimeter-based defense, or a Snickers bar defense. Zero Trust, says end-to-end security. A cool sort of idea we had from this, or idea. It was not our idea. But we had this discussion in Copenhagen when I was at a conference there. A lot of people who worked in SOCs and security teams found that whatever background their lead had, so the SOC lead, if they had a background in network, they focused primarily on network detection and network protection, and not so much on identity, because that's, if you've ever met network or identity people, they claim to be the single source of protection for the entire company, and they don't get along at all, and only their thing is really Zero Trust, when in fact both of them are, and neither of them can be it on their own, but it is what it is. So here is, another anti-pattern, is that people believe that, I invested in a new firewall. Now they will never get in, but they will just, attackers will pull at every string they can find, and they will pull the hardest where it unravels. So you need to focus on everything, which is bad news for us. And I guess I lied a bit in the beginning when I said, do I need to purchase something? You might if you don't have something, but, yeah. At this point, again, no, I'm just asking for it, but if you haven't scanned the QR code by now, I think, Oh, cool. What type of events would you recommend to send a SOC from API applications? Oh, that's a good... Ooh, I forgot to bring the slide where I lay this out, but basically, most applications are encapsulated. So basically we have, if you integrate your applications, if they're like, let's say it's a user-facing application, so you integrate the identity provider, so you have audit and sign-in logs. Then you have, the network logs, and if you run it in the cloud, you have the cloud logs. You have the transaction logs through the database, and so you have also, maybe you have the Kubernetes logs or whatever. You have a lot of logs encapsulating the application. So usually in a security operations sort of way, you would never ever want application logs unless it's a very serious critical application. In that case, if you really want the application logs, I think it depends on what the application does. The phrase "it depends" has been the most useful phrase since consultancy was invented, I think. But it's hard to answer without knowing the specific application. So whoever asked this question, give me a good example later, and I can try to answer it a bit more clearly, because it's way easier with context. And we'll get back to that point exactly of context a bit later. For the rest of the talk, I will do some examples. They're all structured the same way. So how it will look is that the first slide will be a statement, probably way too put on the in Norway we say på spissen, but I guess it's being way too generalistic. Then the second slide will be an example of how that happens, and then the third slide will be a suggestion or a remedy from me. And keep in mind this is based on my context, so it might not work in your environment, but yeah. So the first one is we are overly reliant on tools these days. A lot of places I go, you're like, yeah, okay, so you have endpoint detection and response. You have EDR agents installed. Cool. And they're like, yes, check. In my ISO certification, I now have EDR. Great. Next. they are not secure by default. EDR tools, they come with a very lax configuration because they need to run and they need to not hinder you in whatever you're doing. And then it's our job as consumers to apply policy and configuration that matches our risk sort of appetite. And then, of course, these tools, even if we configure them, can be bypassed. So it's up to us to have some sort of custom detections in place. Of course, we cannot predict every single bypass, but we can we can find some patterns. So an example of this is from August of last year. There was a malvertising campaign in the Nordics. Basically, it was a search engine poisoning. So you would get Google results, a PDF editor that was signed, it installed, it bypassed Sentinel-1, Palo Alto, Cortex, XDR, EDR, Microsoft Defender, EDR. And a couple of days after we started handling the incident, TruSec posted this slide with a pretty low detection rate in VirusTotal, and 10 days earlier it was 0. So what does that mean? Well, it means that, of course, the tools we use, just relying on the tools, of course, it helps us get to a certain level quickly, but we can't just install them without configuring and tuning them, and we can't just think that they will always protect us. I guess this is a bit outside of the context of this talk, but I think we are in a state where it's become more common to know about the user interface of a tool. We have moved up so many abstraction layers that a lot of people don't know what's going on beneath anymore. So we are configuring stuff in portals created by these giant enterprises, but we don't really know what's going on underneath them, and we don't really know what's going on. I think someone said here the other day, working on like EDR agents and stuff, and someone asked the question, because we said, does this work well for all distros? And someone said, what's a distro? I was like, what do you mean, what's a distro? But I think the idea here is that it's a too sort of prone thing where, yes, we need to configure and tune the tools, but we also need to understand what could happen on our endpoints and in our environments and log it and detect it, not relying on all these tools to do the job for us, because we have become quite lazy and complacent, to be fair. Me included, of course. So yeah, this is the structure of the examples. All right. So we visited this one earlier, logging all the things, with an example of a company logging all the things costing a bunch of money. Now, what this shows is a clear lack of understanding of your own company and your own data. It takes time and skill, but instead of logging all the things, what we can do is reverse engineering the logs we want. So we've seen this before. Basically, the source sends data into the SIM. It's sorted into different tables. We run queries, and then that generates alerts. At some point, the alerts reach a certain threshold, and we get an incident. Now, if you come to me and you say, I have a Kubernetes cluster security, please, I would say, what is the security, or what is the Kubernetes cluster used for? What are you afraid of happening to that cluster? So we start in the other direction with, what are we trying to stop or detect? Right? What are we afraid of? What is the worst thing that could possibly happen? When we know that, and we are given that context, it's easy for the security people to say, well, what we are trying to detect, we can express that as a query, and since we know what tables we need to write that query, you can then reverse engineer that to what data we need to gather, and then that in the end becomes sort of like the total amount of logs we need. Now, this is just for detection, but if we account for compliance, threat hunting, operational requirements, and something like a cyber insurance, it's way easier to find out what data you need to sort of have a good coverage. You don't need to start with Microsoft best practice, because I'm a Microsoft MVP, so I guess I'm the elephant in the room here, but best practice will always try to get you to pay way too much money for stuff, right? So you need to have some sort of understanding of what we're actually trying to stop or protect against, and have some sort of threat model or threat assessment or an idea of what might threaten you. And you can do this, and it's so much better. And this doesn't take long at all. It's really simple. And if you outsource this to an external SOC, this does not become less of your responsibility. This is something you can do together. If you I worked in a external SOC. It's way easier to work with companies that have an idea about what they are trying to protect than companies who are just, I have no idea, I have a bunch of stuff in Azure, please help me. Yeah. A bit of I get heated when I talk about this because, yeah, no. Let's move on. A bit more on the people and culture side. When it comes to one thing we did in our SOC was that every time, and this was a lesson we learned because for a long time things were quite stale, nothing improved, and a lot of it had to do with the way we were handling incidents. We thought that the systems we had put in place would scale or indefinitely, and they don't. So we need to change something. And the way we did this is that we had to security is quite deep. It's a complex topic with a lot of moving parts. A lot of those moving parts we built ourselves. They can change. And so the best example I have of this, or first things first, when you get new people on board, just make them believe that everything can change. Even if it's something that Microsoft does or Azure does, make them question everything they do, not like in a workplace harassment kind of way, but in a, why are we doing this? Is this the most effective way to go about it? And every time they come with something, if it's something that can be fixed, try to fix it. So the best way I know to do this, I'm a very visual person, is to draw out what the issue is as a diagram. So we did this. We had an old SIM system that we used that was not optimal. And so I drew out the entire sort of, from the monitored systems all the way to the IT service management and the ticketing. And I started to pinpoint where are the issues. So, missing context, lack of control, all these things. And these are not important. The important part is that what we were able to glean from this was that, oh, the SIM is the problem. The ITSM was a bit of a problem as well, but we couldn't change it because it was company mandated that we use it. So we changed the SIM, and everything improved quite drastically over the next couple of years. I'm not saying you should change your tooling, but let's say one of the processes you use for sending data from the SIM, or something you do for enrichment, maybe it's giving a lot of context data that the analysts never use. They don't need it. It's just, messing with their heads. Remove it. If they're missing data, maybe they always search VirusTotal. Give them that information from the get-go. But yeah, I think one of the most important lessons we got from this was we hired a quite senior security analyst, and we told him, we gaslighted him into believing everything can change. The world is your oyster. And in 3 weeks, he had made more suggestions and more improvements than we had made in the previous year, just by telling him that, the sky's the limit. And he kept finding all these little things we were doing, not wrong, but that wasn't optimal. And we got so much improvement out of it. I think it's one of the best things I ever did, to lie a little bit, actually. So, yeah, it's something you can keep in your tool set, I guess. The takeaways, if you take away anything today, other than the fact that I'm a bit of an idiot, logging is important, but be pragmatic. Understand your data and make sure that it goes where it's supposed to go. Not everything needs to go into the most expensive storage category. Start with templates. Modify to fit you. You don't need to. It can be off the shelf. Not every solution needs to be tailor-made to you, and you don't need to pay premium. But yeah, I think it's much more smart to buy a suit from Dressmann and then just make it, have some modifications done, than buying, from scratch made suit. But that's just me. I own a few suits, but they don't fit very well anymore. Talk about what you want to protect and why. This is maybe the most important thing. Context matters so much in writing or getting good detection coverage. Norwegian Army has this for everything we are and everything we, for everything we have and everything we are. I always mess that up. But it's easier for everyone involved if it's an external SOC, internal SOC, if you're working, you're deploying a new system or writing a new application, and you want it to be secured by your SOC or your security team. Give context. Why does this matter? What am I afraid of? What does this thing do? So it's easier to understand. And yeah, processes and flows are not set in stone. And yeah, at this point, we are reaching the end. So no more questions on the phone, but if there's any questions here in the audience,